Hello and welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shepard-Nazi. Beheadings, brutal killings, barbaric rule. What is daily life like under the Islamic State? How do civilians survive under terror leadership? Author, investigative journalist Jürgen Todenhofer visited a place few Westerners risk to go, and he's with me today to share what he's seen after spending time inside the Islamic State.
Traveling into the heart of darkness, staring madness in the face. How does a Westerner enter Islamic State and come back alive? What's hidden behind the wall of media-savvy cruelty and medieval barbarism? And how much longer can the self-proclaimed caliphate hold out?
Jürgen Todenhofer, the investigative journalist who went inside the territory of the Islamic State. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us. Now, Dr. Todenhofer, recent events have seen several ISIS defeats. When the group moved into Shia or non-Arab territory, it was actually repelled. The Kurds score victories against them, the Shias, the Iraqi army. Has the ISIS threat passed, in your opinion?
The situation hasn't substantially changed since December. And if the Americans or NATO is saying that IS lost 25% of the territory, this is just not true. It's not the truth. Maybe that they have lost between 5 or 10%, but this doesn't play any role in a guerrilla war where people are moving.
So just to make sure, in your opinion, ISIS is as strong as ever?
Yeah, it's the same. Nothing has changed substantially, unfortunately, I say.
I just want to take you back a little bit about your journey into the Islamic State, because I know you spent 10 days inside ISIS. How did you manage to talk to them into giving you safe passage?
I know Syria very well. I love Syria. I've been there a dozen of times, and I like Iraq. I've spent much time before the war and during the war and after the war. And for example, in Syria, I spoke to all the groups, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army. I spoke several times to President Bashar al-Assad. And suddenly, IS became very strong, and I wanted to get the information, who are these terrorists? What is making them so strong? And why so many German jihadists go to the so-called Islamic State? And so together with my son, we wrote on Facebook letters to around about 80 German jihadists. We got 15 answers, and out of these 15, at the end, we had a guy from another not that known terrorist group and a guy from IS. And then this IS guy told us he was not allowed to speak with me anymore. I would be called by somebody else who is named by the leadership, and I had somebody from the propaganda department, from the media department, and so I had the connection. So every normal journalist could have done the same. Okay,
but like this is really playing it with fire. Who was that person who actually gave you the safe passage? And because journalists, you know, they get beheaded by ISIS all the time. We see it on YouTube, almost weekly.
I know.
So
even a friend of mine.
Yeah. So why were you sure when you were going that they wouldn't, change their mind and just take you hostage? I mean, the safe passage papers were just papers. How could you be sure that they weren't fake, or they would protect you?
I discussed via Skype with this guy from the media department, sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours, about the possibilities, about the guarantees and everything. And to be sure, because my son, for example, always said it's a trick, they will behead you, they need a German hostage. I had the impression that they gave the invitation as the Islamic State, as a state. And they wanted to show that if they give a guarantee by the state, they will stick to this guarantee. They have published, I asked them to publish this guarantee on Twitter. I've been waiting some days to see if the real leadership would deny this invitation. They did not deny anything. And so I took the risk. For me, the 6 months where I was thinking, will I come back alive, will I survive, were harder than the 10 days in the Islamic State. Because there I was sure they wanted to...
Are you saying that if journalists had actually followed your example and negotiated an official invitation from Islamic State, they would have spared their lives?
Not everybody, but specialists, yes, because we are known as specialists for the Arab world, for the Muslim world. We have written books about this. Our books are translated into Arabic, and they have the feeling that we don't go to such a country for show, that we've tried to find out the truth and that we want to tell the truth.
Now, in the beginning of the show, you
said...
And
what I think what they wanted to show to me, I always had to think, what do they want? They wanted to show that they are really a state.
We can actually talk about that. We're going to talk about that. I really wonder how the whole infrastructure works. But, you know, what really strikes me is what you've said in the beginning of the show, that you actually met an enormous number of young, educated, enthusiastic fighters that were arriving every day to join ISIS. You mentioned 50 Germans. You also met people coming from places like New Jersey. How did they explain their choice to you?
But they didn't tell me the whole story. I got the whole story by living with some of these IS terrorists during 10 days. But the people I met in the street, they said, it's the time of our life and we are creating something completely new, a real Islamic State. And they were fanatic, enthusiastic, and in the longer discussion, I could never understand why they were so enthusiastic and why they were able to kill in a very perverse and brutal way innocent people. They were, I would say, completely brainwashed.
But see, when I hear you talk, you also portray ISIS as very fearsome, the mighty ISIS. But isn't that precisely what they want you to say to the Western people? Fear is the ISIS PR weapon of choice, after all.
No, I think nobody has attacked the Caliph stronger than I did. I made several public warnings to young Germans not to go to IS. They don't like that at all. And I have said that this is not an Islamic State, this is an anti-Islamic state. The only thing that I had to accept, that this is a state. It works as a state, it has traffic police, it has judges, it has social care, you have to pay taxes, and it's not a good state. It's not a perfectly working state, but it's a state. You cannot, de facto, it's a state. And I don't think that they are happy with what I have said, because there is a new audio video by the Caliph which came out, and he's practically answering to an open letter that I wrote to him, which was published in the whole Arab world, in the newspapers by Al Jazeera, in 4 German newspapers, to several million people on my Facebook site. And he's in a certain way answering to my attacks. And the fact that I attacked him personally, I think in a correct way, but very, very strongly, doesn't improve my security. For example, in Germany, when I make a lecture about my new book, the last 3 cities and universities I asked to speak didn't give me the rooms for security reasons. They fear an Islamic attack. So you cannot say that I have said what IS wanted me to say. I've never done what people want me to say. I have met Assad. I met him 5 times. So everybody said, oh yeah, you're the spokesman of Assad. I've met Al-Qaeda. Was I the spokesman of Al-Qaeda? I think we have, if we want to beat our enemies, we have to talk with them. And the relations, for example, between the Soviet Union and the Western countries improved from the moment when the Soviet leaders spoke with the Western leaders and when the Western leaders spoke with the Soviet leaders. And sometimes politicians don't speak with the enemy. Kissinger, for example, said, you know, Vietnam, I don't have to talk with them. This is a third-class communist agricultural country. So some years later, they had to leave Vietnam.
I see your point. I see your point.
He didn't have to talk with them.
I see your point, and of course people should talk. But you know, the example with Soviet Union and the United States is a little far-fetched because now we're talking about Islamic State. There are terrorists. So, but we're gonna take, and how do you talk to terrorists? That's the big question. But we're gonna take a short break right now, and when we come back, we'll continue talking to Jürgen Todenhofer, the journalist who went inside ISIS and came back alive, and shares his insights on life in a terror state. Stay with us. And we're back with Jürgen Todenhofer, the man who went inside the Islamic State and returned, talking about how the terror group governs occupied territories. So, Dr. Todenhofer, talk to me about the ISIS media relations. I mean, they're surgically effective. Their media support for their activities overwhelming. Who are the people making it happen? I imagine you met someone who deals with their PR. Are they from the West?
I don't know it exactly. I suppose that the leading people in the media department which make this incredible, bloody, but nevertheless professional propaganda, this horrible propaganda, are from Germany. I think some of them are from Solingen. The guy I contacted via Skype was from Solingen too, and they worked together with an English team in which you have Jihadi John. That's the butcher, the killer, the guy who is beheading. Usually, not always, but usually it's Jihadi John, and this is a German and British co-production.
Have you met anyone personally from there?
As you could read in my book, our driver, who was not a driver only, he was the boss of the whole commando, IS commando, which was with me, was this butcher, this so-called Jihadi John. He wore always his mask, but I had the opportunity to see him once in a special room in our restaurant, and he got completely crazy and furious because I've seen him, and when we came back, it was easy to identify his voice. We identified his voice already in the Islamic State, but then we could identify all the other things, his hair and his face, and he wanted me to have a meeting with a British journalist with the name, I will not say the name because I don't want to create problems for him, who was supposed to give me a letter to his family and a letter to David Cameron. And it is known that Jihadi John, the butcher, is just doing that. He keeps the relations between the families and the hostages. And he wanted me to do the same thing. I refused. I said, I will not appear in a video of the Islamic State. I will meet this journalist if you want, But then we film, or nobody films, but I will not meet this man if you film and if you try to use me for propaganda, for your propaganda.
Let's talk a little bit about the life in under the Islamic State. You know, I want the details. You say Damascus is still paying salaries to government workers in Raqqa, which is the capital of IS. Do those people support ISIS too? How is that possible? How does it work?
The IS people I discussed this point, they told me that I was very surprised by that, but I had a third person who made the protocol and noted every word. The ISIS people told me that if there would be elections in Raqqa, Assad would win these elections because of many reasons. One of the reasons is that he is paying the salaries. And the IS people in Syria are not liked. That's what they told me. They said the population doesn't like us. They don't like the European, they don't like the guys from Caucasian regions. And one of the reasons because IS is not liked in Syria is in Syria 70% of the fighters are foreigners. So it would be like if Chinese people in our country, in Germany, would be in the streets and would command and would have to say what we have to do. In Iraq, it's different. In Iraq, you have only 30% of foreigners fighting. So that's not so obvious for the population. But in Syria, IS, with 70% of foreign fighters, is for the population a kind of occupation. And they told me they don't like us. And it's not easy for us.
Now, you witnessed the bombing by coalition forces. The IS fighters escorting you to hide from drone strikes were on the lookout for American bombs. So the coalition air campaign is putting pressure on them, isn't it?
Yes and no. It is putting pressure on them personally. If we were, the American bombers and American drones found us. They saw that the terrorist commander who was with us was transporting weapons from our van to some little bungalows. And then suddenly we had 2 drones and 2 bombers over us and coming down and coming down. And this is very, very strange, and that's not easy for an IS fight. It was not easy for us neither. And of course, they fear the rockets from, or the hellfire rockets from the drones or the bombs from the airplanes, because there is no defense. But in the other way, they think that American bombardments are in a certain way strengthening their position, because in these bombardments, a lot of innocents are killed. I believe, and I have seen, I was, as I told you, in Iraq during the war, I was in Afghanistan during the war, that more than 90% of the victims of bomb attacks and of drone attacks are civilians. And for every child the Americans kill in, let's say, Mosul, you have 100 new terrorists, 100 new friends of IS. So that's the reason why they say, let them bombard us. And they find now strategies to avoid the bombardments because they don't stick together. They don't, in Raqqa, we left in a little apartment and other IS fighters left 500 meters away in another little apartment in the middle of a big house where a lot of civilians are living. So it's very difficult to hide them and to get them. But of course, militarily, the bombs have killed a lot of IS fighters.
But also,
more
I'm wondering,
fighters came from the Western countries.
Yeah, but I'm also wondering how long can one keep it up? I mean, being constantly on the run from death from above?
In Mosul, Mosul is a city with 2 million people, and 1 million is living in the suburbs. And maybe between 10 and 20,000 IS fighters live in Mosul. When I was there, 5,000 IS fighters live there. How will you eliminate 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 fighters in a city of 2 or 3 million? You cannot. You have to destroy the whole city, as the Americans have done in Kobane. Kobane doesn't exist anymore. And IS had to leave because there was no place to hide anymore. So bombarding is the wrong strategy. And bombarding is the wrong strategy. I can prove this to you with 2 figures. At the beginning of the war on terror in 2001, we had some hundreds of international terrorists in the Hindu Kush. Now, after 13 years of war on terror, we have more than 100,000 international terrorists in the world. So where is the success of the bombardments? There's no success. We have created these terrorists. We have cultivated them.
Actually, talking about that, you also talking about cultivating the terrorists. You also say that the Syrian rebels U.S. supported are the same terrorists the U.S. is now fighting. How did that happen? And does Washington realize that?
I think that the knowledge of Europe and of the Americans about the Middle East is very little. You criticized me, and I spent every year during 50 years my free time in the Middle East. So I know a little bit about the Middle East. The Americans don't know anything. They thought if they would attack Saddam Hussein, there would be democracy in the whole Middle East. And what do we have now? Chaos in the whole Middle East. And we are surprised that in this chaos we have now chaotic people, terrorists, like IS. So I give you another example. The United States are supporting the Free Syrian Army. These are the Western, from the Western countries, financed rebels. But these FSA fighters, they sell their ammunition to IS. The IS fighters told me, we need them. We get almost all our ammunition from the FSA. And we also get weapons from the FSA. And we get weapons from the Kurds. And we hope that you send a lot of weapons to the Kurds, because we can, at the end, buy them on the market. And I saw German machine guns. I saw them myself. It's a complete mess. And the only solution would be, I personally think the only solution in the Middle East is that the Western countries should withdraw their troops from the Middle East and their bases from the Middle East. We have nothing to do there. We don't have bases in China. We don't have bases in India. We don't need bases in the Middle East. It's not our country. It's the country of the Muslims over there and the Christians over there, but not of our countries. It's a big mistake to think that the Middle East is our personal garden where we can go whenever we want.
You know, thank you so much for this insight into the world of Islamic State. It was quite interesting to see how this all functions from inside, and to hear everything from someone who has spent so much time studying the Arabic world. We were talking to Dr. Jürgen Todenhofer, author of Inside IS, 10 Days in the Islamic State, a man who went into ISIS territory and came back alive, sharing his story with us. That's it for this edition of Sophie & Co, and we'll see you next time.